I am way overdue with this, but I figured better late than never. So last month I published this beauty, A Sojourn in the Sunset Forest. Guys, check it out. I cannot be happier with all of the cover art for my series. And this one, like, wow, man. So this was done by Andrew Molesky. If you haven't heard of him, I'll put a link down below. He is one of the best artists I have ever seen. I love his work, and yeah, really, really happy with this. I realized that I haven't taken any time to talk about my books on this channel, so I wanted an opportunity to do that, talk a little bit about my series, and also some tips on writing. Just in case you are like just some thoughts about the experience of writing the books, and then maybe some tips if you were interested in writing yourself. So, what my books are, if you haven't heard of them, is I wrote a duology called The Book of Estea. So it starts with this guy here, Riven Earth, book one, and then volume two is Sundered Moon. And this is a duology. It is two separate books, but it's a complete story within those two books. But then I also call it the Book of Estea because to me, I really do think of them as one continuous book. Um, so to talk a little bit about these books, maybe the easiest way to do that would just be to read the blurb on Riven Earth. So I'm going to do that here. Uh, the world has stopped turning, burned by a blazing sun, thrust into eternal winter. Life survives only in the sunset forest. For untold millennia, mankind lived subservient to the Dryads, forced into worship of the Earth Mother Estea. Then one man ventured into the scorched desert and returned with the secret of fire. His rebellion brought the Dryad Empire to ash. In his place, he founded the kingdom of Heartsong. 12 years later, the new king is missing. The earth trembles, famine ravages the land, and a mysterious illness creeps to the capital. Plots of treason and revenge abound, but as the mistakes of the past bear fruit, men will reap what they have sown. Open now the Book of Estea and learn what has been forgotten. Guys, you have no idea how hard that blurb was to write. Like the amount of revisions that went into that, like, oh my god, I was slamming my head against the table. But I think it turned out alright in the end. So essentially, I think it kind of gives an idea of the story. We're talking about an alternate world, a world which just stopped turning. So half of it is facing the sun, and it's just way too hot. You can't live there. Half of it is it's always nighttime, and it's way too cold. You can't live there. So there's a strip of land in the middle called the Sunset Forest, which is very creative, I know, and that's where everyone lives. So there used to be this Dryad Empire, which was there, and they had basically enslaved mankind. They were forcing them to worship the Earth Mother Estea. And then one guy, he basically snuck past the Dryads. He escaped their enslavement, and he found the secret of fire. Because in this world, like they didn't have fire at this time, they had some other technologies they were using instead. So he found the secret of fire, and using fire, obviously dryads are like tree lady creatures, so fire is like their natural weakness. So he used fire and basically overthrew their empire, and he had founded his own kingdom. So we really pick up the story 12 years after that, and it's a story about this kingdom in its infancy, right? It's a kingdom which is trying to establish itself and is dealing with all of these growing pains. There's a lot of internal politics. There's too many people. We have to build them houses. Like how do we set up our economy? How do we extract resources efficiently and all that stuff? So that's kind of what the kingdom is dealing with. And at the same time, they start seeing these things which shouldn't be happening. There's earthquakes. There's famine. There's like an illness creeping through the capital. So essentially, something's going on, right? Like they overthrew the dryads. They have abandoned their worship of the Earth Mother Estea, and now something's not right. So that's essentially what they had to figure out. And this story was inspired. I was doing some research on Indian history. There's this king called Ashoka the Great. So Ashoka essentially he lived a few years before Alexander, like around that time, and he was a conqueror. So he did what kings do. He went and conquered a bunch of people. But Ashoka, essentially, after this certain specific bout of conquering, he visited the people there, and he realized just the level of destruction that he had like sown, and he felt a deep regret at it. He saw like the bloodshed and like what's left behind after war, and after that, he changed. So the story is like we don't actually know what happened, obviously, but we love stories here. So the story is that Ashoka basically became a pacifist, and he embraced Buddhism, and he is the king who spread Buddhism across India, and he had a long reign, and he built up the place, and he was well beloved, and etc. So essentially, my inspiration from that, the little seed from that story of Ashoka, which inspired me to write this book, was just this idea of a king who deeply regrets what he's done, and he's basically lost his confidence in himself. So then, where does he go from there, right? Like, how does he find his way back to the throne? And that was the seed of the story. And then, like once you have a seed, other things start sprouting, popping in. You had the queen, like the king's wife. How does she feel about all this? You have his advisor who's running the kingdom in his place, and then you have like his political enemies and like an old general, and all of these other stories started popping into my head. And essentially, I basically just came up with character arcs for these people, and like this was a long process of I'm not a plotter, but I was essentially just daydreaming through like these people's lives and like getting to know them better and understanding all of their flaws. And the story is essentially based around character arcs. So that's the first thing I would say, is that this is a very character centric book series. And even though it is grimdark, I think most people call it grimdark. It, I think, has a sense of hope and heart. So it's not like not everyone is bad. I think most characters in this series are gray, but more so because they're kind of dumb and they make stupid mistakes. But a lot of them are trying to do their best. So yeah, I think that is essentially what it is. But at the same time, I try my best to really build unique world building. You know, the world here is, there's this thematic element of the three, right? Like I talked about how there's like three sides of the world, and so the world is essentially embodied with three different magics. You have sun, earth, and moon, and everything kind of revolves around that. So I try to integrate the world building very deeply into the plot, and yeah, essentially that's how it goes. So check it out if you haven't. You know, Riven Earth, Sundered Moon. These guys are, you know, I'm very proud of them. I think when you finish a book series like this, you sit back and you're like, you know, there's a lot of things I could have done differently, but there's also a certain magic to them. So the new book, A Sojourn in the Sunset Forest, this guy is essentially a companion novella. So I consider this volume 2.5 or volume 3, you could call it. And this book was written specifically for fans of the original series. Like if you enjoyed the first two books, this was an opportunity to spend a bit more time with these characters, to spend a bit more time in this world. It is a prequel, so it's set like 4 years before Riven Earth, but at the same time, I suggest reading it afterwards. I just think it has more of an impact if you read it after you read the main series. This book is available for free. So if you went to my website, link down below, you can sign up for my mailing list. I never send out newsletters, so you'll just get an ebook for free if you do that, which is cool. And if you want to buy the physical version, that's on Amazon. Check it out. I think the physical books are so pretty. So, you know, obviously I'm biased, but I recommend you go do that. And yeah, so that is essentially my series. Some thoughts that I had on writing these. You know, for me, I mentioned before, like I'm not much of a plotter personally. For me, writing this story was really just an act of living the story. It was the most immersive storytelling experience that I have ever experienced. It was really just as a daily thing of just daydreaming, you know, like being in this world and being with these characters. And then when I sit down to type, I'm like, okay, so what's going on, and what kind of trouble are you guys going to get into? And then they just make their decisions, and I'm like, well, that's your fault. You know, you did this to yourself. So that's essentially how I went about writing the story. I don't know if I recommend that for everyone, but one thing I would say is that probably the hardest thing about writing books, this is what I've learned, is finishing them. Right? Like it sounds like the most absurd thing, but finishing that first draft will be probably where most authors struggle the most. So I think like really the one recommendation I can give you there is don't write a book for the sake of writing a book. Obviously, people do that, and a lot of them are professionals, and they're, you know, this is their livelihood. But if you're just an average person and you're interested in writing a book, I would recommend that you wait until you feel a story coming to you, and like you just can't help but write it. You know, like that will be the greatest motivation to continue it. It'll be when you can't stop thinking about the story, you can't stop thinking about these characters. You know, they're like intruding in your life. You're at a meeting at work, and all you're doing is like daydreaming about some other world, right? So once you get to that point, that's when I recommend, like, okay, you've got a passion here, and like you've got to, like, for the sake of your own sanity, you've got to sit down and just put this world out there. And if you do that, then it'll become easier. Like that was one of the things with writing these books, is I burned out writing these because it's a lot of work. And I wrote them in just about a year. I finished the main duology. It is a lot of work, but at the same time, even though I felt myself burning out, it was like, I don't really want to do anything else. Like I want to be in this world. I want to get this down on paper. I want to just write it. And then it wasn't until I finished that I was like, oh, geez, man, that was rough. And then, so yeah, like that's probably my main recommendation, is like really write a story that speaks to you, right? And don't let too much other stuff come into it. Don't be too put off by the notion that like, oh, no one's ever going to read this, or no, it's never going to make any money. Like I recommend not thinking about those things. You know, like ultimately, when you have published a book, what you'll find is a lot of people in your life are going to be like, "Oh, so are you going to retire now because you're an author? So you're automatically a millionaire because all they're just thinking of like J.K. Rowling or something." And in reality, it's like if you're an indie author, you'll be kind of lucky to pay it off, like pay off the cover art and all the other expenses that go into it. I've been very fortunate with my own books to at least get to that point. But essentially, like you are probably not going to make much money on your first books, but at the same time, there's just it is maybe one of the most amazing feelings in the world that I've ever had, where I wrote this story and then I shared it and it connected with people, right? And it just means the absolute world. And at first, it was scary putting it out there because, you know, like you don't know if it's good. You really don't, and it's very hard to distance yourself from your own book. Like for myself, like I did think that they were decent books at least. And then like you know when you get a bad review, that can really hurt. So a lot of authors say don't look at reviews. I think that's generally good advice. Me personally, I can't help it. Like reviews are what drive me and motivate me as well when I get good ones. And yeah, so that's the other part of the story is like yes, you'll get bad reviews and yes, they'll hurt, but you can take them very constructively. You can understand that yes, you're right. These books are not perfect, right? Like I should not tell you guys this, but when I you know like I think about the way I wrote this book, and one of the things with this book is that it's got a very non-linear storytelling style. And now I think back, I'm like, why did I do that? I don't know if that's a good idea. But at the same time, that is one of the magics about this one, right? Like that's one of the things that makes it special. I think is just the way that things were revealed and everything. But essentially, like a lot of that criticism, you can take it, internalize it, understand that not every book will work for every person, but then also understand like the story that you were trying to tell and the audience that you were trying to reach, you know, like you may have done very well at that. And so that's when people give you that positive response. And like sometimes I get messages from people who've read these books and connected with them. And it is like definitely just the greatest feeling to know that I put it out there. So I hope that's a little bit of motivation. I hope that's, you know, a little bit of advice that I can give you. Essentially, like if you are interested in writing a book, like go for it. It is a very satisfying experience. And the funny thing that I find is, you know, I look back at these and I'm like, you know, like I can open it and read a paragraph and sometimes it's like, damn, I did good writing that, eh? Like that is some good stuff. And then other times I'm like, what was I thinking? I would not write that down. So it's kind of funny. I think it's like this book was written by Zamar Amr of like 2 years ago, and it's not me now. So the book I'm writing now, it's very different. So I'm very excited about that. But I'll always be very proud of these guys. You know, like it is a part of yourself that you're putting out in the world, and um, you know that's it's one of the coolest things. Like it was a dream come true that I have my own books. So yeah, that was a lot of rambling, guys. I hope that it was at least a little bit coherent. If you have any questions about my books, if you know feel like checking them out, that would be so awesome. But even if you don't, that's fine too. You know, like happy reading, guys. I hope that you guys have had an awesome February. I know the world seems to be going upside down and crazy right now, but you know that's what we have our books for, and that is our happy place, isn't it? So you know, for myself, I've been reading really into the Great Coats recently. That's been awesome. Very much enjoying those books, and I just started R.J. Barker's Bone Chips, which is Thai Child. Like that is so good. Like he's one of those authors which like even though I just started, I'm like, yeah, this guy's gonna make me feel bad about myself. Yeah. So you guys have a great day. Have a great week, and happy reading to you all. Okay, so I filmed all that rambling only to realize none of it was actually very practical. So I figured I'd do another take and let you know a few other thoughts I had. So the first thing I would say is the first draft is very much a first draft, right? You should think of it that way, or at least the way that I think of it is the first draft is the author telling themselves a story. So I mentioned before, I am not much of a plotter. I'm very much a pantser. And what I found was like when I was writing the first draft, I didn't really understand my world. I didn't really know where the plot was gonna go. I kind of just let it go where it went. But then at the end of it, I had a much better, much clearer picture, and then I could go back in my second draft, essentially pull everything together. Right, take out the inconsistencies and basically just go through it all. Like you can edit the first half of your book much better once you know the second half, right? For people who are more centered around plotting, who spend a lot of time plotting their stories beforehand. For them, I think the first draft will probably end up in much better shape than my one was. But I would say the objective for your first draft should be to not stumble too much, to not get too caught up, especially on a sentence to sentence level, right? Like um, once you get around to editing, at least for me, it's like every single sentence has to be perfect, and you're like breaking your head over every word choice and all that stuff. For your first draft, just let it out, just type it out, live in the story, live in the moment, enjoy it. That is like the most rewarding, fun part of writing for me. It's just the first draft because you're living it, right? You're like experiencing the story as it happens. It's just so immersive. So give yourself that freedom and don't take on too much pressure. You can change everything afterwards. And then once you get around to actually editing, that's where you put in the hard work, right? For me, editing is very hard. It is a very stringent process of just slaving over every single word. But with that said, my number one tip for editing is understand that it will never be perfect, right? That you could always change things, but you will get to this point where you realize you're actually only changing things for the sake of changing them without actually making things better. Like you're just changing it without improving it. And once you're at that point, then you realize that your story's in a pretty good place to go out there. The final thoughts I would have would be centered around marketing. So, only one tip here, guys. Your cover is everything. Like, I don't think my mom would have bought this book if I didn't have a cool cover on it. Like, whatever you do, insofar as marketing is concerned, you can run ads, you can do your networking and stuff. Nothing matters if your cover isn't on point. So definitely focus on that. Understand that any marketing material you add afterwards, like say you're running an ad or something, that builds off of your cover. So definitely make sure you nail that. And insofar as like actually getting a cool cover scene, I don't know. I just thought when I was writing the book, like, oh yeah, this would be a cool scene for this one, and that's how it turned out to be. So then you just communicate that to your artist and go from there. So that's what I would say. I think when you are looking for an editor, you should definitely be getting your books edited. Finding the right editor is very, very, very important. I highly recommend if you can get your editor to, even if you have to pay them a little bit, just edit, say, the first chapter or the first few pages of your book. Once you have an understanding of what their style is like and how well it matches with your style, then you proceed with them, right? So you don't want to end up in a situation where you've committed yourself to an editor and you've paid them whatever their dues are, and then you find out that actually you're not happy with the changes that they're making to your book, right? Like they're making line edits and you're like, I don't like the way that's worded. The other tip I would have is sometimes, a lot of the times, like you listen to your editor when they make a change or they suggest a change, but sometimes understanding that they are seeing something is wrong, but the change they're suggesting is not necessarily the one that you'll want to go with in the end, right? That is the way they might have rewritten a sentence or something, but what you should do is look at the original sentence and be like, okay, what did they see wrong about this? And then how would I fix that? And I think that is a good way to maintain your own sense of authorial voice when you're writing your book. And yeah, I think that's mostly what I had. I would suggest just go at it, guys. Like, just sit down, type, live the story. That's what it's all about. And yeah, so I hope you don't mind this little addendum, and have an awesome day.